Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for being here for our first Dockside chat. My name's Bob Bailey. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. For those of you who haven't experienced this, I know most of us have. This is really important for me, especially with the kind of work that I do and what we're talking about today. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm standing on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe First Nation, just a few clicks from Curve Lake First Nation, our neighbors here on beautiful Lower Buckhorn Lake. So thanks for the welcome that we've had here. The work I do, it's important to me that it really speaks to the communities of this area, particularly the indigenous communities. Well, thanks very much to the Kawartha Lake Stewards Association for giving me this chance to tell you a little bit about the research I'm doing in the Trent Severn Lakes. Before I do that, I wanted to go back a few decades and just give you a little bit of a window into how I got started in looking at freshwater lakes and streams. About 40 years ago, I did a master's with Jerry Mackey at the University of Guelph. Jerry's a great freshwater malacologist. He works on clams and snails. And at the time, interestingly enough, I was working on fingernail clams, these little couple of millimeters long clams that live in ponds and lakes. And one of my field sites was at Birdsall's Beach, just across Rice Lake from where I live now in Harwood, Ontario. So I did the master's with Jerry. I did a PhD at Western in the 80s on the pre-zebra mussel mollusk community in Long Point Bay and Lake Erie. And then I stayed on at Western for over 20 years as a biology and environmental science prof. I worked on everything from those same zebra mussels in the Great Lakes to the effect of gold mining on streams in the Yukon, to the effect of intensive agriculture on streams in southwestern Ontario. And a couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to get back to what I think of as the best job in the world, working as a prof, doing research on lakes and streams. Coincidentally, back in 2012, my family bought this wonderful place on the shore of Lower Buckhorn Lake, and I started getting interested in the Trent Severn as a system and Lower Buckhorn in particular. One thing I noticed was the weeds. Everybody notices the weeds, and not just how abundant they were, but how they tended to go up and down from one year to the next. I thought I could rely on data that people had collected. People like my neighbor, Janet Duvall, who had pictures. They'd been around for decades here. They had photographs. They had written records of the plants, of the weeds. And so I thought I could build my model from that. And then one day I was talking to Eric Sager, and he mentioned in our conversation the idea of using satellite data. And I don't know if Eric realizes this, but it really planted a seed with me, and I did a bunch of reading on it and a bunch of research, and that's led to the work I'm doing now. So here's a satellite photo of the Kawartha Lakes area, and to use the satellite photos to measure the abundance of the weeds, I take advantage of two things. One is the satellite photos are actually multispectral. They're recording the image across the light spectrum, red, green, blue, but also infrared. And it turns out that photosynthesizers are like, I guess I think of them as selective foragers. They're pretty good at absorbing and using red, green, blue light. They're not so good at absorbing infrared radiation, that light energy. So they reflect a lot of that back, and we exploit it, as you can see here. The more infrared we see reflected back to the satellite, the more photosynthesis is going on. So I use the amount of that to quantify the amount of vegetation that's growing in the lake. The other piece of information I needed for my model was
depth in the lake at every point. So I needed what we call a bathymetric map, but I needed it to be digital. So there's lots of old MNR, MOE, lake survey bathymetric maps available, like this one of Lower Buckhorn. And I turned that into a digital map so I know at every point in the lake what the relative depth is, what the depth was when that lake survey was taken. So I'm just starting to model now, and I put together the abundance of vegetation as measured by the satellite back in 2018, along with the depth, and that helped me predict to a pretty good precision what the abundance of vegetation was at every point in 2020. So I made a little bit of progress, as I've shown you with the satellite work, but also needed to sort of ground truth the satellite information. So I thought I needed to get a closer look at the lake at the same time the satellite was getting its image. So I bought this drone, and the drone takes the same kind of multispectral images that the satellite does, and so I'll be able to relate what the drone is seeing to what the satellite's seeing. So I pre-plan a mission on this iPad app, and then I fly the drone, and it takes all the photos that I then look at in the same way that I look at the satellite photo. Okay, getting ready to run the mission. Here we go. So thanks everybody for listening to my talk. I put my email address up there. Please contact me if you have any questions, and especially if you've got some historical information, images, written records of how the weeds were, other environmental observations. Love to get them. Thank you so much again for listening.